So excited to welcome everybody back. We had some great follow-up questions from our previous webinar on the state of sustainability that we'd like to cover today. You can obviously get this in download at the SpecRite website. We'll share some links towards the end of this short extended cut. So I would like to welcome our panel back. Glad to have John, Prashant, and Michelle back for these follow-up questions, as I think most saw from the first webinar. Very rich in content, great backgrounds, and a lot of good information shared. So welcome back, everybody. So the first question we got, and Prashant, I'm going to throw this one off to you, certainly your realm of expertise. How do you determine the carbon footprint of your products? Prashant?
All right, so Matthew, thank you for the question. So within the Compass software, you can manually enter the bill of material for your package or your product and perform a quick LCA. This will give you the carbon footprint of your package. And based on the information you enter, you can actually get a full cradle to gate analysis. So the carbon footprint for your raw materials, for your manufacturing process, transportation, end of life, etc. All of them can be calculated. Now, as a side note, I would always recommend that look at more than one indicator. Carbon footprint is obviously a very common one, but water consumption or fossil fuel or eutrophication or toxicities, these are all great things to look at as well. In fact, Compass calculates about 8 different indicators, and they're all industry standards. Now, in addition to this standalone analysis, we have also done an integration with SpecRite. So if you want to take one or many specs from within SpecRite itself, you can just launch Compass, and all the data that is required for the analysis is automatically transferred to Compass, and you can see the analysis results right away.
That's great, Prashant. I know your wealth of knowledge came through in the original webinar, and certainly I think everybody can lean towards you as an expert in this area that's so critical today as we go forward. So we look at the next question, and obviously, Michelle, this one certainly will come to you. How do US EPR legislations compare with the European counterpart?
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks for having me back after the first webinar. So, I mean, I think the first thing to mention is that, of course, there's no one single standard of European EPR either. So when we talk about comparisons with the US, there are lots of things to pick up on that are similar, and there are definitely things to pick up on that are different, both within individual states, but also within the individual European countries. And I think certainly some of the things to pick up on in terms of topics first would be the scope of the legislation. So the legislation that's coming out from a US side is looking at printed paper in some cases. That's often not picked up in Europe, but it is in Canada. And then it's also looking at some food serviceware items as well, which doesn't as well always get picked up as a specific item within Europe. And then I guess some of the other things which are the same, we would find that there's a lot of eco-modulation language being used within the US legislation. That is definitely pushing ahead in terms of a lot of the European countries, but it is still emerging in some European countries. It has been the law there for that to be pushed through, but it's not in place in a lot of the markets. So I think when the US picks theirs up, they certainly will be picking it up at that level of eco-modulation straight away rather than phasing it in over a set of time. Probably one of the biggest differences that the US, of course, is going with a state-led system. There isn't a federal system. But you could easily balance that off against the picture of each of the European countries being its own version of the law. And so we're looking at a similar type of geography with a similar number of maybe different programs coming through with the growth of EPR programs here in the US. I guess one thing I think is kind of interesting that's coming through on the US legislation side is this harmonized list of recyclables that is required. That is likely to be different by state at the moment until they have a way of maybe bringing those together across multiple jurisdictions. And in European legislation, there isn't really always this defined list of what they call whitelisted products or recyclable products. They just weight the fees based on what is more or less recyclable under a modulation program. So I'm very interested to see how that one develops. And then maybe a couple of other things that are the same. Again, here is, there are thresholds in place. There is thresholds for the size of business or the turnover of business. They're coming in, so there will be certain businesses in the US that are excluded. You often find that type of a threshold in other EPR programs as well. And it just allows a balance of large and small businesses to be treated in a slightly different way. And also in the EU, there are often then maybe smaller businesses will have to maybe sometimes just pay a flat fee or have to do a more simplified reporting mechanism. And I guess maybe one of the last things to have a look at, which is the same or different, there are certain exemptions. And across all EPR programs, you will find that some things are exempt. Some of the EU countries still keep out secondary or tertiary packaging from their legislation. And I know that some of the programs that have come through on that are now law in the US have looked at taking out maybe medical packaging or exempting some other types of packaging. So there's no easy answer of what is the same or different, but there certainly are some similarities and there certainly are some differences we can see coming through.
No, listening to you, Michelle, I appreciate that very much. Certainly what it harpens is that there's high complexity, certainly as you mentioned, with quite a varying degree of regulations throughout Europe. And then obviously we're starting to see that in the States, likewise, high complexity scenario. And again, back to the original survey, it showed that many companies are leaning towards third-party experts, and definitely listening to you, you're one that could be leaned on for the complexity of this EPR. So thank you for that. The next question came in a little bit more broad, which was how can one be involved in the sustainable packaging space? And I'll jump on that one first and then send it around. Personally, I spend a fair amount of time with academia. A couple current projects going on would be Cal Poly's consortium that is really looking at sustainability reporting amongst many companies. Also going to participate in Virginia Tech's MS of Packaging Sustainability program that's being developed, and doing some work with MSU here in the fall. So I look at kind of a ground up approach, around academia, learning, and influencing kind of the outcomes from that. So that's one area I would say that people can get involved in. John, I know this is an area that you spend a fair amount of time thinking through, so love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I really like this question because I speak to a lot of organizations and individuals within organizations who struggle to get started in this sustainable packaging space. And where I start is to guide them in terms of get a high level view of the packaging that your organization is responsible for. So it might be what they buy, what they produce. And again, we know, from the survey, we often struggle, to get really that kind of granular data. So I often recommend, even, just getting to financial details. So oftentimes it's maybe a bit quicker. Again, it's higher level, but it might be quicker to get from finance or procurement. Let's get a breakdown of what we're buying, who we're buying it from, in terms of material categories. And ultimately, we need more detail than that. We need to get to the quantity of the materials by weight, of the different formats, where we sell these, final packaging. But if we can start with that financial detail, we can start to see all the different variations. And quite often, it's a lot more types of packaging than organizations realize. And we find that this can be quite revealing. And then, the next step to that would be, I think of it as doing a SWOT analysis. So with this collection of different packaging materials and formats, if we start to look at, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we can start to, determine, a bit of a strategy or a bit of next steps, or what's our perhaps lower hanging fruit and what are the things that are longer term initiatives. And then finally, I would say, to learn as much as you can about the space, right? So learning more about recycling, the recycling practices, again, globally. So looking anywhere your products, might be sold, looking at the strategies of leading companies, what are they going after in terms of innovation, technology, and goals. And then, working with packaging suppliers, again, looking at the innovations that that they're working on. And then probably finally, looking at the different foundations and associations. So, there's a lot of great content that they're putting out, white papers, so forth. But I think if you kind of take the multi-pronged approach, you can start to get involved and start to understand the landscape, and then help your organization and others to take action.
Yeah, thank you, John. I like the inward look at it. I think you're absolutely right. A lot of companies and/or people within companies or both are struggling with where to get started and how to get started. So great advice there. Michelle, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I'm not sure I can improve on John's answer, to be honest. How can you be involved in sustainable packaging space if you don't know equally what is also unsustainable? Because how do you know how to make the right decisions to design and create sustainable packaging if you don't know what also could be non-recyclable, or if you don't know what your data footprint is? If you don't start looking at all of those things to help you get a baseline and get a grounding of where you currently are, you can't improve and you can't develop. But of course, my focus in all of this always comes back to the legislation, and there's a lot of legislation nowadays which really is driving companies and making them look at this sustainable picture from a mandated legislation perspective. So not anymore, oh, well, we might look at it at some point. Really, well, it's on the table now and we want you to do something about it. And that comes in the form of the plastics taxes, and it comes in the form of the bonuses and the malices and the eco-modulation fees that we see within EPR programs. And all of those items, all of those topics are there to also try and push this agenda, to try and make the changes that are needed, because people have therefore done some of that legwork for you to be able to tell you what is or what isn't better from a design or recycling perspective. And so using what's been out there from a legislation perspective can also really help that education side, and that also can really help companies to look at what their portfolio is and how they can improve it. Those pieces of legislation aren't there for no reason.
I was going to say, Michelle, I think you did a great job of adding value. So you're going to make the bar even higher there for you, Prashant, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Prashant, in addition to everything that was just shared.
Okay, so there are many different ways in which you can get involved in the SPC packaging space. One very prominent one is the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. It's a great organization to be a part of. A lot of leading brands in the US, retailers, packaging suppliers, nonprofit organizations, even packaging schools are members here. And we have been members there for more than a decade. And what I like about them is they were the first organization that even created the definition of what is sustainable packaging. Back then, it wasn't very clear what it meant. They're also the original home of the Compass software. And the other thing is, every year they conduct two great conferences. One is in spring and one is in fall. In fact, the upcoming one is in Atlanta this coming October. So I would highly recommend, being a part of this organization, as well as going to their conferences, because you will meet a lot of people that are in the same boat as you. Either trying to figure out how to conduct these initiatives in your own organizations, best practices, what tools to use, etc. Now, besides these, there are other organizations, especially in the US. There is a Climate Collaborative. That's an organization with a lot of natural foods as members. There is the Pet Sustainability Coalition, which is obviously a membership of all pet food manufacturers. We are members there too, but they're niche ones, right? So hope this is helpful for you.
Great, thank you, Prashant, for that. And we're going to go to our last question that was shared, and I'll answer this one. And basically, in one sense, what is the current state of sustainability? I think we've covered a lot in the report. I think we covered a lot in the first webinar and certainly added, I think, some value to this. As I look at it, I think the state of sustainability is very complex with high expectations, which is driving the need for the right data that will enable action to drive forward momentum. And so I think it's an amazing topic and certainly a great panel that has put this together. And I really appreciate John, Michelle, and Prashant's time and dedication to doing this. I know it's something we're all passionate about. And again, at kind of the top, I shared that we could find this report, and this is where you could find it, specrite.com sustainability, and look forward to continuing the dialogue and again, making action happen here. Thank you all.